Ladies and gentlemen, I've obsessed over macros, cut out entire food groups, and even tried fasting. But what if the best diet isn't any one thing, but what works for you as an individual? As a clinical psychologist and natural bodybuilder, I've studied how diet impacts both the mind and the body. And in today's essay, we're breaking down the three most common types of diet restriction strategies. Credit to Lane Norton for this idea. And this is going to help you figure out what works best for you. Plus, I'll share my personal favorite at the end. Let's start with number one, calorie restriction. So, calorie restriction means monitoring your daily calorie intake using apps or food journals to regulate energy balance. This is like the IIFYM, if it's your macros way of dieting. It's best suited for people who enjoy structure and control over their diet. Now, if you'd rather include all foods in your plan than eliminate certain food groups, or if you're the kind of person who enjoys data and numbers, this may be your match. Personality-wise, getting into a bit of psychology, it tends to fit high conscientiousness individuals who like being organized and planning things in detail. So I remember sitting in a restaurant, phone and MyFitnessPal in my hand, a menu in the other, trying to figure out if I could afford an extra 50 calories. This way does make every meal feel like a math problem, for better or worse. However, there are real benefits to this method. No food is off limits. You can adjust your intake between days. And if you're comfortable estimating portions, eating out becomes manageable. So it builds awareness of your food choices, which helps create better habits over time. But there are some drawbacks. It can be mentally exhausting, especially early on. And there's a real risk of becoming obsessive. A common trap is focusing only on hitting macros and ignoring overall food quality. These are all psychologically relevant details because our friends and family begin to notice all this macro crunching. The goal's no longer nutrition, but numbers. And when you're dieting, the last thing you need to do is try and make appropriate food choices in a big deficit. So pure calorie restriction is probably the most powerful thing you can do for your physique. And you should treat it less like a hammer and more like an omni tool. So what happens when we move away from numbers and just cut out certain foods entirely? That's where food restriction comes in. Food restriction involves eliminating entire food groups. You'll be familiar with this in keto, vegan, carnivore. These diets are best for people who appreciate sweeping rules and less strategy. And I say there's less strategy involved because you eat specific foods, not others, and the composition of these foods generally helps to create greater satiety and a natural calorie deficit. Now, they can also serve specific health needs, like using keto for epilepsy, or reflect what other ethical beliefs you may have. They also tend to work well for people who value community or being a part of a specific culture. Lord knows within 5 minutes of meeting a keto or vegan person, you know it. So easy to make friends. From a personality standpoint, again, psychology channel, people high in agreeableness and openness may attempt food restriction diets more frequently because if you're high in these traits, there's a higher likelihood you can be convinced and are open to trying them. Regardless, what are some of the pros of this style? There are definite pros. So the structure helps reduce decision fatigue. Again, huge because making decisions is a lot of the battle whenever you are dieting. Now, these diets can also target specific health needs, so your local dietitian about that. And you have unlimited online communities that pop up around them. So tons of social support. But there are downsides too. If not planned carefully, you can miss out on nutrients like, B12, fiber, omega-3s. And if your friends or family don't eat the same way, social events can get awkward or isolating. Plus, not all restaurants cater to those specific dietary patterns, whereas something like calorie restriction, calorie counting may be more amenable to flexibility. So, what if you don't want to count calories or cut out foods, but still want structure? For some, the master variable isn't even food, which brings us to time restriction. Time restriction, time restricted feeding, or intermittent fasting means limiting your eating to specific windows during the day. So for example, 16-8, 18-6, 24, or even alternate day fasting, which is wild. Highly don't recommend, especially if you're interested in building muscle. So who is this approach good for? Well, people who prefer simplicity, fewer food decisions, bigger meals, generally have stable schedules. And I mention schedules because if your schedule varies, then having specific windows for eating may be more difficult. So just be prepared that if your window is from 9 to 5 or noon to 8, but your primary working hours are at that time, this might not be for you, or you need to pick a different window. Now, how this strategy works well if you're someone who naturally skips breakfast or isn't hungry in the mornings, and people with high emotional stability benefit. Those less prone to sort of stress eating can do better with this method. Now, I mention emotional stability because stress eating is a common occurrence. And with the other two strategies, you can fit foods in at all hours of the day. Still, there are some strong benefits. You don't need to track anything, planning meals is easier, and eating bigger meals can feel more satisfying. Still, highly recommend finding ways to quantify your protein intake per meal, but that's a side point. And it brings us to some of the issues with this style. The problems come when people overeat during their eating window, which is huge. For some, their satiety signals won't kick in, and they might end up eating in a huge surplus. Counterintuitively, though, it's also not ideal if you're trying to build muscle because it limits how often you can eat protein throughout the day, and we know you need several boluses. Now, if you do a 16-8 window, workout in this time frame, spread your meals out evenly, you can make it work. Other pitfalls may include crashing during long workouts if you don't structure your nutrients accordingly. Now, for the part that I've been waiting to share, my personal favorite, the hybrid approach. So this combines calorie restriction with time restriction. You track your calories, but within a set eating window. So why do I like it? Well, because it blends the structure and flexibility. It naturally created larger meals because it compressed my eating hours, and socially, it's manageable. You can still go out and have a life, especially if you pick something like, I don't know, 16-8, and you're not in a severe deficit. It can also line up well with bodybuilding. You can hit your protein targets because you're tracking. You can also plan around your workouts. And personally, it reduced my cognitive stress because I knew I was hitting my macro goals and my meals weren't tiny. For me, this combo was perfect. I can enjoy bigger meals, hit my protein goals, and work in a variety of foods. Dieting finally felt sustainable and I wasn't starving, and I didn't have to cut any specific foods out. Now, this hybrid method isn't perfect because it really doesn't leverage natural satiety cues like some of the other food restriction methods, and the combo of tracking with time restriction can be more stressful in combination. So, if you're not used to tracking, I would highly recommend calorie restriction through tracking, some nutrient rich IIFYM, and then add in an eating window or time restriction later. Folks, whether you choose calorie restriction, food, time restriction, or use a combination, the best diet is the one that fits your psychology, supports your goals, and is sustainable. Just remember, adherence is king. So figure out what you can stick to and that nets you the gains that you want. And if any of that was helpful, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next episode for something bodybuilding or bodybuilding and psychology related. Peace.